Hello, and welcome to And Still We Rise, Uniting Women for Change, a podcast series by Churches for Middle East Peace, or CMEP. I'm your co-host, Destiny Magnet, coming to you from Boston.
Alongside Tamar Haddad, sharing from Jerusalem. Each episode, we bring you the voices of American and Palestinian women as they share their stories and insights on peace building, spirituality, and current events, including the bombing of Gaza.
Get ready to explore the depths of the Palestinian struggle, learn about the forms and features of American solidarity, and draw inspiration from the unity and resilience of these incredible women.
Disclaimer: the views expressed are those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent CMEP. Hello everyone, we are recording this episode on the 27th of December. In today's episode, we are hosting two young activists. Our first guest for today is Ciara Abed, who is a young Palestinian citizen of Israel, advocate, and leader of Standing Together, where she fights to end the occupation and the end of differential treatment of Jews and non-Jews in Israel. Sally also co-hosts the podcast Groundwork. She lives in Haifa and she believes in peace, equality, and social justice in the homeland.
And our second guest today, Ciara, is a graduate student and activist whose studies center around promoting greater religious and cultural literacy in human rights and foreign policy spaces. She has previously worked for a variety of international bodies and in human rights organizations, including the United Nations and the Carter Center. She has also been involved in campus organizing for both Palestinian liberation and Iran's Woman, Life, Freedom movement. So welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for being here today. Ciara, to get into a bit of your background and the work that you do, you spent a few months in the occupied West Bank in the summer of 2022 and returned from that experience sharing what you witnessed, but also really animated to jump into the Woman, Life, Freedom movement, which was happening at the time and is ongoing in Iran. What was that like for you? I wonder if you could share what connections do you see between these movements and how do you hold both of them at the same time in your advocacy?
Coming back from the West Bank and entering to school and then seeing the Women, Life, Freedom movement launch with the murder of Gina Mahsa Amini in Iran, it was very, very difficult times for both people, and holding both and recognizing the intertwining of the struggles while also kind of the weaponization of the struggles on both sides for Iranians and the Palestinian and Israeli context as well. And I think for me, ultimately, it came back to justice and liberation and seeing this feminist movement in Iran and looking at my experience interacting with many, many Palestinians from all different aspects of both geographically and career-wise or education-wise, whatever it may be. I felt that it was really, really important going into the Iran work to ground myself in the same values that are really, really important upon all struggles and movements, and having that moral consistency that I felt was definitely lacking, seeing everyone look at Iran, everyone draw attention to Iran, rightfully so, and then see other struggles, including the Palestinian one, that was totally left out of the concern, particularly of the West, but also generally.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we can't fight one struggle without fighting the other. And the thing with advocacy is that you plant a seed and eventually it pays off. It's a very long process. So, Sally, can you please give us a briefing on what you did on Capitol Hill? I know you were there before Christmas. So, how did it go? And do you think it was effective? CMEP also had its own delegation on Capitol Hill regarding Christmas cancellation. And I'm going to be honest, I did not think that it was effective at first, but you see progress after a while. And are you seeing the progress of what you planted before Christmas?
As a grassroots community organizer, my theory of change in many ways stems from the understanding that advocacy, the way that it is today, doesn't actually bring about the deep change that we need, but rather is just at best remedies, temporary remedies to what we do. And it's important to say that, when we went to the Senate and we went to the Congress and we met with the Progressive Caucus and many amazing, allies that have been talking about ceasefire and have been talking about Palestinian rights and Palestinian liberation, you could see that they are also fighting a fight within. And I think I wouldn't have called what we did was advocacy rather than validate their work as well as sync it to, let's say, the left that we are trying to build here in Israel. There is no left in Israel, and we are trying to build it from the ashes. There is a fascist right, there is a racist right, and then there is a racist center. There is no left. I think in many ways, the politicians on Capitol Hill, where I don't think it was clear for them who are they talking to in Israel. And I think we were able to give them some kind of picture of who's our audience, who's our target audience, who's our base right now in Israeli society, what are our challenges, and also how can we actually envision a collaboration of the progressive left and the liberation movement abroad, especially in the US, as well as how it can actually help building the political will within Israeli society for Palestinian liberation out of Israeli self-interest, because otherwise, moral lecturing doesn't work. We know that, unfortunately. And I think in that sense, it was effective. I do think that we were able to create very important links and collaborations. And long term, we're going to continue working with these leaders, with these progressive leaders. So we are able to also have a space as a Palestinian Jewish Israeli left within that conversation, which is very, very important.
I love hearing about your theory of change and how these multiple levels work together, the grassroots and at times looking at other systems. And Ciara, I know you've also done a bit of congressional advocacy with CMEP, and I wonder if you have anything to add about your experience, maybe even sharing, you work on religious literacy. Do you think that there's something to be said for the way that we approach congressional advocacy on Middle East issues or even Iranian issues in a religiously literate way? I wonder if you could speak to one or both of those pieces.
So when I came back from Palestine, I had the opportunity to work with CMUP briefly by supporting in some Zoom delegations, speaking on the Justice for Shireen bill, as well as ending child detentions. And it was really interesting to be around much of the CMUP delegation. I was the youngest one on the CMUP delegation, and that was really amazing to see all of these really powerful people speaking on this issue that they've been fighting for decades. It was also really frustrating to see that it's the same fight that they've been fighting for decades. But going back to the question about the youth as well, they really felt that my experience being there over the summer and from the youth perspective was really, really helpful to get through to the congressional staff of this is what she witnessed just being there. And a lot of people, particularly that work on the Hill, don't, they're assigned to many different thematic areas, topics that they didn't even know about before coming on the Hill, and now have to respond to it and figure out their members' policy position. And so to have that experience, although short, and I'm sure Sally, growing up there, living there, like it's a very different perspective and positionality you bring. It was really, really important to bring that. And from the second standpoint about religious literacy, I think that's also been really important with any context that we're educating folks on, particularly those in positions of power or have access to power, because ultimately there's a lot of monolithic interpretations that can be really, really harmful and detrimental to the movement. And particularly with Iran, I felt it was really difficult for us. We were both wanted Iranian women to have rights, to have freedom, but our understanding of what that looked like or why it's the case or the historical and cultural literacy was completely lacking on a lot of their ends. And so having to unpack that of like, yes, we both want the same things. However, the way you're speaking about this is actually problematic, and here's why. And I felt the same with doing Palestine work, although with Palestine work, it's been interesting because a lot of the time we're not coming from the same understanding, and we're not coming from the background or the religiously literate background that we definitely need in a lot of these movements that gets left to the side.
Absolutely. And the CMEP perspective on this, I think, is particularly interesting because Palestinian Christians are so often written out of the narratives that we hear, and particularly with the bombing of Gaza now and the imminent threat to the entire Christian population in Gaza. I think that's something really important to highlight, is the internal diversity of Palestinians, and making sure that people know that they're not just one thing or one background has been important. And I'll add that Churches for Middle East Peace will also be hosting our 40th anniversary advocacy summit in April. So if anyone listening feels called to congressional advocacy, that's a great way to kind of dip your toes in, get your feet wet, whether you're a seasoned advocate or looking to go to the Hill for the first time.
Sally, I have noticed that you were recently part of a protest of both Israelis and Palestinians against the atrocities of the Israeli occupation after the 7th of October, of course. And I wonder if anyone has referred to your work in general as normalization, since you promote peace between Palestine and Israel. And what is your response to that?
I do receive. I don't think they call it normalizing. Some of them do. Some of them call it liberal, which is even more, which is even more offensive. It's a very isolating experience. It's a very ungrateful experience as Palestinian to have to advocate for the society that is refusing your existence or conditioning your existence, right, in your homeland. So to receive the criticism from the other side is very isolating. It's heartbreaking because we are already at a very maddening situation. I am probably one of, like, I honestly want to say, like 10, 20 Palestinian voices in Israel that are like voicing out things. I am very, very lucky and privileged to have a movement that is backing me out legally, that is giving me private security, against all the threats here in Israel. And so to be able to do that is extremely privileged for me. And to receive the attacks from the other side is definitely difficult, but I also understand it. I think in many ways, Palestinian liberation movement in general, and Palestinians in the diaspora and in Gaza and in the West Bank, we have been fragmented, we have been isolated from each other for so many years. I have no idea what the Gazan experience is, or the West Bank. Maybe a little bit more. I have more access to there. I have more friends there. I go there, and I think in many ways, they don't understand my experience. They don't understand our reality and also our duality, which is very difficult to accept. Even for me at this point, I'm like, really, is it? Is it? Do I have a dual experience? Because my experience is definitely not something that any Jewish Israeli would experience right now as a Palestinian. But also, I live here. I have Jewish colleagues and friends and neighbors, and it's all conditional and it's all very careful. And it's, the master is hurting. So you have to be very careful everything that you do. But at the same time, you are a colleague and you are a friend and you are a neighbor and you are on buses together and on the train together. And my mom calls me and then I don't answer in Arabic. And it's a maddening experience just as a regular Palestinian. But then adding to that the complexity of being a public figure is just maddening. So I understand the normalization issues, but what people need to understand is that occupation and the Palestinian reality within the Israeli society is already normalized. What we're trying to do is actually denormalize it and make it something that is actually talked about and put it on the table. And you cannot do that through a Palestinian narrative and fighting the Jewish Israeli narrative, because under a very, very deep realization of the hegemony and the power differential, you need to come to people in their emotional state and what actually they need. And we need to build political will out of self-interest for Jewish Israelis, for Jews in our homeland. And that it's a completely different conversation than the righteous narrative for Palestinian liberation. And I don't like the word "it's complicated." It's not complicated. Our truth is very simple and it's very clear, And in many ways, I think what's happening right now in the world is that's exactly what's happening. Like the question of the Nakba in 48 and the continuous Nakba throughout the decades and our realities, they're not up for discussion anymore. It's a fact. So it's not complicated. That's not what's complicated. What's complicated is how do we actually translate that to the Jewish Israeli public who has been living under a completely different universe and understanding and perspective of their reality and their existence on this land. So how do you do that? Is a very, very different mission. And that's what I try to tell people. We're trying to denormalize the occupation and the systemic violent oppression of Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, and within Israel. And we're the ones who are able to do it as Palestinians. They won't be able to get it if I don't fight with them for collective liberation. For women, I work with Jewish women, Jewish queer, Jewish blacks, Jewish, Arabs, Mizrahim, Eastern Jews, I have to work with them. And that's a collective liberation. And that's how you denormalize the occupation. And that's my answer. And I definitely get those accusations, but it is what it is. I do believe that we will be able to sync and actually be able to build a more unified and much more collaborated Palestinian narrative within 48 and the diaspora and the West Bank and Gaza. I really hope that we will be able to advance this from this point forward.
Yeah, that was so powerful. And I'm really caught on the reality and duality and living in both at the same time. I think that was incredible. And for Ciara, I want to turn to your experience now as a student working in a difficult space on the US side of things. And college campuses, as we both know as students, have been very tense since October 7th. So I wonder if you could share a little bit of just what's it like to be a student right now, and how has Palestinian student organizing now compared to your organizing for women, life, freedom in Iran over the past couple of years?
It's been a very crazy time to be a student doing this work, particularly in the United States. I think it's been really frustrating to see what's happening every day to Palestinians and have to worry about our own campus culture and who's going to get doxxed and whose faces are going to be in who knows where because they've been everywhere. I think that's been really frustrating, and we know that it's all intentional to deflect from the ongoing genocide of Palestinians. And I think the narrative amidst a lot of student groups has been, regardless of what's happening to us, it doesn't really matter because what's happening to them is just incomprehensible. And therefore, every aspect that we have where the light shines on us, we need to be projecting that light onto Gaza, onto atrocities in the West Bank, onto silencing of Palestinian citizens of Israel, whoever's affected, whatever it may be. That's where we're trying to focus our attention. And I think students, at least for me, being an American, and I know I felt this really, really heavily coming back from living in the West Bank, was that I knew that what was happening here was because of my Americanness, and it wasn't me. However, I was a part of the system, and thinking about how are things going to change. Like, my theory of change was educating my peers in the United States, hoping that the more people who know about this, who become aware, will be fed up, will be frustrated that our tax dollars are going towards this, and then ultimately want to shift. And so as students, being a part of these institutions where free expression is consistently cramped, and it's been this case even before October 7th. How are we going to break through and not be scared of the censorship and consequences of our actions? Because it takes all of us to see a shift as well in what's happening in the Israel-Palestine context, which seems crazy. People think it's in some faraway land, but I think finally, unfortunately, over the last few months, people are finally starting to realize how deeply complicit we are and why what's happening there is actually directly because of our representatives here.
My last question to Sally is going to be about the relationships you've had. You said you had Jewish friends, Jewish Israeli. And I wonder if your relationship with them has changed after the 7th of October and how it is now.
Well, I'm not an example. I'm surrounded by by Jews who are, way past. They are already in the new paradigm with me. So I don't think I am an example. I have, one of my very closest friends lost her cousin in the south, and she's more than ever like. So I don't think I'm an example. I definitely witness and hear a lot of people around me who are frightened by the shift in the Israeli public. People who would have been leftist, quote unquote, people don't see me right now, quote unquote leftist, who are currently, saying, yeah, there's nothing to do about, like, yeah, it's like, you got to do what you got to do. You got to kill 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100, 200,000, whatever it takes. And this is the best case scenario, literally. Like, we are talking about people who are against the government, against Bibi Netanyahu, against the fascist right, the Zionist religious parties, and all the settler radicals in the government, against settlements, against the occupation, again, all of this, good package. And I'm sorry I'm being cynical about it, but then when it comes to the atrocities being done in Gaza, there is almost a complete alignment over what needs to be done, and that's just do what you got to do to achieve something that is not achievable, which is diminish Hamas or whatever. And it's very concerning. It's very concerning because there is no alternative. The Israeli politics is actually failing again and again and again to provide an alternative idea to literally genocide and ethnic cleansing. There's literally no politician right now who is saying, even Benny Gantz, who is probably going to be the next prime minister, who is, seen as the most quote unquote moderate right now. He joined the emergency government. He is in the war cabinet, and he is completely aligned with everything that they're doing. The Labor Party, which is the most left at the point, completely aligned with the current policies. And that is translated into our day-to-day lives. And I said it before very casually, but I want to, really get into it. There is really a sense that the master is hurting. And I'm not saying this lightly. I'm saying this because, my mom, for example, she is a social worker at the social welfare, national social welfare. And she's actually she's treating and dealing with hostages families and families of people who were killed on October 7th. And she literally cannot say she's Palestinian. She will be fired for doing that. And then she's coming home and she is just so frustrated because she's like, literally everyone around her, the genocidal talk and the fascist talk is just normalized and condoned, perhaps not supported by everyone, actually by the majority of people. According to polls, majority of people wouldn't support it, but they condone it. And that's very, very, very dangerous, extremely dangerous. And I think what we're trying to do is, how do you fight that? Is we don't want to believe that the Israeli society is inherently immoral, right? It's just that you live in a hegemony and you live in a place where you are literally the master. That's your existence. And I don't say this lightly. I know people are like, oh, that's so like grotesque to say master and slave, but it's literally our experience, you know? And they have gone through such a deep methodological, systemic process of dehumanizing Palestinians over the years, and this moral dissonance of what we do to Palestinians as Israelis is necessary, right, for us to survive. And right now, you know, October 7th really even like magnified that. And then you don't have an alternative. You literally have no one telling you what can be different. And how can you actually be safe with Palestinian liberation? And that's the role of the new Israeli left, which doesn't exist, which we're trying to build. And it's a very, very difficult mission. And it's very difficult when you are surrounded by people who are normalizing and condoning what's happening in Gaza. And again, it's maddening.
Speaking of places where change is often slow, my question for Ciara has to do with the academy. And how do you, as someone positioned, at least in part, in the academy right now, how does that play into your justice work? Do you think it's possible to fully center justice in scholarship? And what role might the academy have in creating change?
Sally, thanks for sharing as well. That was really interesting and frustrating and all the things. I applaud you for pushing forward amidst it all. The academy. I have never been more disillusioned about everything, but particularly these institutions and ultimately who they serve, and not only about not protecting students, but also practicing what you preach. And I think in some schools and majors, concentrations, people expect more. And I think what we're seeing alongside the censorship and silencing and general McCarthyist era that we're in, particularly in the United States, professors are also scared. The academy is scared, and they're remaining neutral. Silence is better than doing anything quote unquote radical. And unfortunately, condemning a genocide shouldn't be radical. It should just be the right thing to do. And going on to all like the atrocities Palestinians have experienced the last 75 years, yet we're at a point where this is some of the most insanely grotesque things we've seen, and we still can't get professors to feel comfortable to even mention it in the classroom. And as students looking to these professors as our inspirations and role models, it really hurts to see, particularly those with tenure who should. I attended a talk with Rashid Khalidi, and he was like, if you have tenure, you have no excuse. Like, full stop, no excuse to not be talking about this right now. And that really stuck with me because I was thinking about all of these professors with tenure who haven't spoken. And so I think, if anything, the academy, this, beacon of what's supposed to be free expression, free academic thought, is completely being disrupted and in a way dismantled of what we thought versus what it is, even though people had criticisms before then. I think the academy is definitely failing us. And unfortunately, just like other genocides and other atrocities, people are going to speak up, once it's in the textbooks, asking in the theoretical why this happened. And particularly, everyone talks about decolonization. It's not a metaphor. I've seen that quote a lot. Yeah, we don't know exactly what decolonization looks like, but I don't want to study it if we're not talking about the reality right now. I don't want to study international human rights law without having conversations about how the UN Security Council is failing us right now. So there's a complete disconnect that many students have then steeped in what's happening every day in Palestine, are looking at our professors being like, are you serious right now? And truly just, I think, are minimizing the respect they have for the people that have been teaching us, unfortunately. But I also don't want to discount the fact that there have been some amazing people who have really come to the fore and use their positionality and privilege to speak on this issue. And so amidst, the disappointment, I've also been inspired by those who have.
Why do you feel like the voices of youth, and especially young women, are so important in advocacy and peace building? What perspectives do you feel like you both have to offer that are maybe lost in other spaces?
Sally.
I think women are essential in, when we talk about revolution and we talk about advocacy, not just advocacy for advancing things within the current status quo, but actually envisioning a different paradigm, a different reality. And I think women are the largest minority, which is a majority that is, marginalized. And we are constantly facing, a status quo that it doesn't work for us. So I think in many ways, we develop tools, understandings, sensitivities, and a capacity for inclusivity and for really encompass as many marginalized groups as possible to really lead a true revolution and a true change in our societies. I cannot overestimate ever the power of women and feminist struggle, really.
Ciara.
I echo that. And I also think on the youth topic, especially, I think we look at kind of the complacency and jadedness, cynicism within older generations. And I think with the youth of what do we want in the future, and recognizing that we're going to have to deal with the consequences of older generations' actions from across all different intersections of issues. And so I think there is a hope very present in at least Gen Z that I'm speaking from, that fills the movement, drives the movement, and kind of are the change makers that we're seeing, learning from past mistakes and also really great strides of other generations. So that, along with the gender element as well, I think has been really, really important to see in a lot of these movements.
I want to thank you both for sharing everything, especially coming from young activists like yourself. And I want to say that everything you both said truly gives me hope as a Palestinian. And I wish you keep doing what you do because your advocacy eventually does make change, whether it's in Palestine, in the US, in Israel, and in Iran. So thank you both very much.
Thank you both for being with us. It was such a rich conversation. We appreciate your perspectives, and I feel like I learned so much from both of you sharing your theories of change, and we'll take it forward.
Pleasure to meet you all.
Thank you. Yes, definitely.
Thank you for listening to And Still We Rise, Uniting Women for Change. Together, Palestinian and American women can make a difference. I'm your co-host, Destiny Magnet, signing off from Boston.
And I'm Tamar Haddad, signing off from Jerusalem. For more information on Churches for Middle East Peace and our work, visit cmap.org. Here, you can find the latest news from the region, opportunities to get involved, and resources for contacting U.S. representatives about our core issues. See you next time!